Still stuck in my fucking watch. Fuck.
In New Zealand, I guess we've got exploitation. What would they have?
Kiwi exploitation? I don't know.
Kiwi exploitation or Kiwi splatter films, maybe? That's where he started his career. So he did things like The Feebles and another one called Bad Taste. So he produced a lot of like these sort of fun, tongue-in-cheek horror films.
Yep.
I haven't seen them outside of The Frighteners. So that's the only one of these horror films that I've actually seen.
Is that the one with Michael J. Fox?
That's the one with Michael J. Fox where he can actually see the dead and goes about stopping poltergeists and whatnot. He's sort of like a Constantine-esque figure, actually, in that film.
Oh,
Start of his
that was closer than I expected.
Ship of the Ring uncut and
3.5 hours.
it was long, but you got through it. But there were a lot of points in that where you could see Peter Jackson's horror influences coming forth.
Yep.
Especially when Frodo is being targeted by the ring wraiths in the forest. So yeah, I haven't seen it, but I'm very aware of his early horror film career.
Off the back of shows utilising puppetry, like Agro's Cartoon Connection and Dinosaurs, which aired on the ABC from 91 to 94.
You can watch Dinosaurs right now. It's all on Disney Plus again. There was a family of dinosaurs. I think we've referenced them a couple of times, haven't we?
I don't remember. When I was a kid, we had like the baby dinosaur, and he lost his clothes really quickly, and that's the only exposure to the dinosaurs that I've ever actually had.
Exposure, interesting turn of phrase there.
It was a cloth belly with like really hard plastic, so it's more like injury.
I'm the baby. Wasn't that what he used to say? I'm the baby.
I don't know.
Voiced by the actor and puppeteer who voiced Elmo.
That wouldn't surprise me. The idea was floated to produce a puppet-based show that could draw in the older children's demographic and secure the ABC as the king of kids' entertainment.
There's a possibility with puppets the kids seem to relate to. There's a wildness to them. They explore and they're curious. They'll ask questions and they don't feel silly. Puppets will ask a question that's really obvious and they don't feel silly doing it. Quote from Tina Matthews Creations, The Ferals, spoke what was unspeakable. Quote from Throwback ABC 2018.
What makes Ferals interesting is its counter-programming approach. While early children's entertainment had mostly been produced with learning and development in mind, The Ferals was an offbeat comedy being influenced by British sitcoms like The Young Ones. Its intention wasn't to teach, but to entertain.
The Ferals is irreverent, situational comedy starring a mangy group of animals living in the backyard shed of an inner-city home. In its first episode, a wannabe musical promoter moves in and attempts to evict the Ferals from his backyard. Quote from The Ferals, an explosion of talent, Australian screen, Tammy Bernstock. And it's an interesting point that you raised there, Holly, that the Ferals were counter-programming at the time because inherently there really isn't much messaging in the Ferals at all.
No.
It's something has happened. So in episode 3 of season 1, for example, Joe King, is their neighbour. His television breaks, so he's got to go over to the neighbour's house, and the Ferals are sort of addicted to television. So the A story, B story, A story is that the 3 humans living in the house make a bet that they can't go without TV for more than 4 days, so that's playing out while the Ferals, who are now being deprived of television, are using Mixie as an antenna so that they can watch a dodgy television in the garage shed.
Bunny ears.
Bunny ears, exactly, Holly. So it's situational. It's very similar to the same dynamic that you would see in an episode of The Simpsons. You know, A story, B story, and putting these characters into 2 different things, which is very counter to what's happening at this time because you have shows that we've discussed, Liftoff, Bananas and Pajamas, Play School, all of these programs which are reaching kids to a certain point. I think what you call Play School's cut off about 6?
Play School's cut off is more like 4.
4, you think?
Yeah.
So that's where that market dies. And then with Bananas and Pajamas, you're probably looking at
2 or 3?
4. I'd say more, don't you think? Well, I mean, it's hard to tell, I suppose.
Depends on the kid.
A lot of us, like, ABC just got turned on and it just ran all the way to the news. And
Yeah.
that was our afternoons. That's how I spent my afternoons.
You can tell what time it was by what show it was on.
Absolutely. So we watched a lot of it at multiple ages. Like, I think, maybe 10 or 11 is when it finally got turned off and the other stuff were turned on. But, then you get to Liftoff, and I think Liftoff really was filling that space to, tackle the 6 to 11-year-olds. But, again, it's all about education. The Ferals isn't. It's really interesting because it's just entertainment. and there's not a lot of messaging mixed in there. So it was counter-programming to what ABC had been producing at that time. And I think the Ferals may have opened the door up to a little bit more of the American programming coming in as well, you know, and that's, we'll talk about it, but eventually, you know, the Ferals make their way to the international market, and with that international market, I think opens up partnerships that flowed into Australia just as much as we exported out there.
The showrunners turned to Garth Frost, a noted puppet designer from New Zealand and one of the few working outside the Jim Henson Company. He had created puppets with an outsider approach. He sat down and figured out the overall design of the characters, how they would function, and how they would appear on the TV. From there, he sketched out character designs that look rather close, if a little disproportionate, to the puppets that were eventually brought to life.
The brief for the Ferals was to stick to the sort of punk characters that had been drawn. She wanted them to have attitude already before someone even put a hand in to operate them. The designer was a friend, and he was more extreme in his design than I ever was. His pictures of a crazed rabbit and a rat that's got a pink ponytail and a little leather jacket sort of kicked it up a level, of course, of craziness. Quote from Tina Matthews Creations, The Ferals spoke what was unspeakable, ABC 2018.
The she was referencing there is Wendy. She's one of the showrunners. Finding someone to make the puppets for the show, however, was a little bit challenging, though they did have help. While it is true that puppets and costumes were still a thing in the 1980s and 90s, they were dying out, and finding someone who could create what executive producer Claire Anderson wanted was going to be difficult, especially in a community as small as the Australian film industry.
When you're making puppets, you have to be open to the character you're creating as you make it. You have to be amused by them in a way, or you have to think about their stance and their attitude and their jutting jaw. You do really have to have a story in your head as you're making them, so they don't end up just looking pretty or fluffy. I had kids at the time who were of an age that I could play with them all the time and try them out. I probably got into their character by playing with them, with the kids. Quote from The Ferals were dangerous. We need them on kids' TV more than ever. Puppeteer says Lee Tonkin, Dave May, and Richard Mocklear. ABC, 25th of August, 2018. God damn it, I rant about this all the time, but ABC, why do you need 3 fucking writers to write that story?
Well, it's even
One
worse.
writer interviews the fucking person, and then it's done.
I was going to say, it's even worse than that. She got interviewed 3 times to make that article.
That's fucked. Why?
Because they're lazy, or they didn't get what they wanted the first time. Second time. Well, then
Third
the editor came back and said, no, we want something different, go do it again.
Yeah, quite possibly, quite possibly. It's interesting when you have a look at the design of the puppets, and especially because I think they look fantastic.
Yeah.
The only, I mean, I guess you could say that if you were to do it this day and age, maybe you would look at putting, I don't know,
Animated eyes. And
maybe animate the eyes, but I think when you look at things like contemporaries like the Muppets, I mean, the Muppets still don't animate the eyes. So I don't know if you would necessarily change the design very much because they're fantastic looking puppets. And it's interesting too, we watched the pilot. So if you're not aware of that term, when someone goes to produce a television show, the very first episode, which is, it used to never be aired and now they're often aired instead of basically reworking the pilot.
Sometimes they're aired and then not released to home video. Thornberries.
Yeah, absolutely. So the pilot is somewhat different to what the Ferals would eventually come out with, and you can see how the puppets they were happy with, they never redesigned.
Radis and Darren.
So it's like, yeah, Darren and Radis are exactly the same in the pilot. Modigliana and Mixie are
Not Mayfield.
very different.
Modigliana is no Mayfield.
She is. She's got this sort of weird head and
Flat face.
very flat face, and Mixie is a little bit sort of frumpy, and
Massive head.
you can sort of see why they decided to refine it. And I happen to think that they're some of the best puppets we've ever created. Like, I mean, I think people often cite Agro, but Agro was really a sort of